The sky was burning. Cities that once stood tall, filled with life and laughter, were now silent ruins. Black smoke curled into the air, mixing with the red glow of fires that never seemed to die. Streets were empty except for broken cars, shattered glass, and the occasional body left to rot under the alien sun. The Vorak Dominion had won. They came without warning. Towering warships, dark as the void, appeared above Earth one morning. Before anyone could react, the bombardment began. Buildings crumbled like sandcastles, and the oceans boiled under their weapons. In the first 3 days, most of the world's governments collapsed. The military fought back, but against Vorak technology, they were nothing more than insects trying to fight a hurricane. Survivors were rounded up and tagged like cattle. The Vorak didn't just conquer Earth, they enslaved it. Humans were forced into massive labor camps, building war machines for an empire that stretched across the galaxy. The Vorak didn't even consider humans a real threat. Too emotional, too fragile, they said. Easy to control. Anyone who resisted was executed publicly. Every morning, the Vorak displayed new bodies hanging from the ruined skyscrapers, a warning to anyone foolish enough to dream of rebellion. Humanity's spirit had been crushed. The Vorak believed they had complete control. Then, one by one, the humans started disappearing. At first, it seemed like a mistake. A worker missing from a factory, a prisoner unaccounted for. The Vorak assumed it was disorganization, carelessness. But then it kept happening. People vanished from locked cells, from guarded bunkers, even from workstations surrounded by surveillance cameras. The strangest part, there were no signs of escape, no tunnels, no broken doors, no bodies, just empty beds, empty chains, empty spaces where people had once been. The Vorak commanders grew nervous. They increased patrols, installed more cameras, and tightened security. It made no difference. The disappearances continued. A man would be standing at his post, and the next second, gone. A woman would be pushing a cart of Vorak weapons, and the next moment, the cart was rolling by itself. Rumors spread through the camps. Some whispered that it was a miracle, that some unseen force was rescuing them. Others thought it was something worse, a Vorak experiment, maybe, or a new disease that erased people from existence. No one knew the truth. In the high command center of the Vorak forces, the warlord Korthos watched the footage with growing unease. He replayed one video over and over. A human worker was standing in a line, waiting for his rations. There were guards on every side, plasma rifles ready. Then, in the blink of an eye, the man was gone. His bowl of food clattered to the ground. The Vorak next to him recoiled in shock. Korthos turned to his officers. "Explain this." No one had an answer. The Vorak were not a race that feared easily. They had conquered dozens of planets, crushed civilizations, erased entire species. But this was different. They had broken the humans. There was no way they could be organizing an escape. And yet, the numbers didn't lie. Hundreds were gone. No trails. No evidence. The disappearances increased. Workers in the factories, prisoners in the holding cells, even those under 24-hour surveillance, one by one, humanity was vanishing before their eyes. And then, the Vorak began disappearing too. A patrol unit failed to report in. When reinforcements arrived, they found nothing but their weapons scattered on the ground. No blood. No signs of a struggle. Just an empty street where 10 Vorak soldiers had once stood. Later that night, screams echoed through one of the main Vorak barracks. By the time the other soldiers arrived, the entire unit had vanished. Only their uniforms remained, neatly folded on their beds. Panic spread through the Vorak ranks. Soldiers refused to patrol alone. Officers started carrying extra weapons, scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. Korthos ordered all humans to be locked in their cells, but it didn't matter. The disappearances continued. It was no longer just an escape, it was an invasion. And for the first time since their arrival, The Vorak felt something they had never felt before. Fear. Korthos stood in the command center, his clawed fingers tightening into a fist. The glow of holographic screens flickered across his scaly face, displaying the latest reports. More disappearances, more missing soldiers, more unanswered questions. He could feel the eyes of his officers on him, waiting for orders, waiting for an explanation. But for the first time in his long, brutal career, he had none. The Vorak Dominion had conquered over 100 worlds. They had faced resistance before. Rebellions, guerrilla warfare, last stands. These were predictable. The usual response was simple: crush the enemy with overwhelming force, break their spirit, and erase their history. It had worked every time. Until now. Humans were weak. He had believed that from the start. The initial invasion had proven it. They were fragile, emotional creatures who fell apart the moment their civilization crumbled. Their armies had been slaughtered. Their leaders had begged for mercy. Their will had been shattered. So how was this happening? The footage was undeniable. Humans were vanishing under impossible circumstances. Even in high-security zones with constant surveillance, they simply ceased to exist. No energy signatures, no life signs, no anomalies that Vorak technology could detect. And now, Vorak warriors were disappearing too. Korthos turned toward his officers. Double patrols. Increased surveillance. I want every human accounted for. Every inch of this planet under watch. His second-in-command, Commander Jorvac, hesitated. My lord, we've already tripled security. We've assigned extra guards to every human labor site. It changes nothing. They're still disappearing. Korthos growled, his tail whipping against the metal floor. Then assign more. I don't care how many it takes. I want answers. Jorvac's mandibles clicked together uneasily. And the missing Vorak, my lord. It is no longer just humans. Entire patrols are vanishing. No distress signals, no signs of battle. It is as if they are being plucked from existence. The command room fell silent. No one wanted to say what they were all thinking. This was not normal. This was not a rebellion. This was something else. That night, Korthos couldn't rest. He stood at the top of the Vorak command tower, gazing at the broken human city below. It was supposed to be a symbol of victory. The towering buildings had been reduced to blackened skeletons, the streets filled with the wreckage of human civilization. It should have felt satisfying. Instead, it felt wrong. A faint, unnatural stillness hung over the ruins, a silence that made the air feel heavier. Korthos had been a warrior for decades, and he had learned to trust his instincts. Right now, every instinct in his body screamed of danger. Something was lurking in the shadows of this planet, something he didn't understand. A sharp noise echoed through the night, a Vorak patrol's communicator crackling to life. Squad Epsilon 7 reporting in. Wait. What is that? Static. Unknown movement detected. Adjusting scanners now. Silence. Then, a scream. Korthos' eyes widened. He activated the command feed, pulling up the patrol's helmet cams. The footage was chaotic. Flashes of movement. Heavy breathing. Weapons raised. A Vorak soldier turned his head sharply. Jorth, where did? His sentence was cut off. The camera flickered violently. The screen blurred for a second, then refocused. The soldier was gone. His weapon lay on the ground, still humming with residual heat. The remaining warriors moved into a defensive stance. Sound off. No response. The soldier wearing the camera turned in a slow circle. The empty streets stretched before him, bathed in the dim glow of Vorak floodlights. But something was wrong. The buildings looked darker, like the shadows had grown deeper. Another flash of movement. Another scream. More static. Then, only silence. Korthos clenched his jaw as he stared at the screen. The patrol was gone. Not a single life sign remained. He rewound the footage, analyzing every frame. There were no gunshots, no energy blasts, no visible attackers. Just absence. The Vorak were being hunted. Panic spread through the ranks. Soldiers refused to patrol alone. Officers slept with their weapons in hand. Even the warlords of the Dominion, creatures bred for battle, found themselves looking over their shoulders. The Vorak had always been the predators. Now, they were the prey. Whispers spread through the camps. Superstition, fear, desperation. Some believed the humans had gained new technology, something that allowed them to erase their enemies from existence. Others thought it was something worse, something unnatural. Even among the enslaved humans, rumors spread. A spark of hope flickered in their tired eyes. They spoke in hushed tones of an unseen force, of a resistance greater than anyone had imagined. The Vorak beat them for such talk, but it made no difference. Hope had returned, and hope was dangerous. Jorvac approached Korthos one evening, his face tense. "My lord, if this continues, we may lose control of the remaining population. They believe something is coming for them, something that will set them free." Korthos turned to face his officer, his voice low and sharp. "And what do you believe, Jorvac?" A long silence followed. Finally, Jorvac exhaled. "I believe something is here that we do not understand, and I believe it is only the beginning." Korthos bared his teeth. He hated fear, hated uncertainty. He had ruled through strength, through domination. But what was strength against an enemy you couldn't see? Against something that didn't follow the rules of war? The Vorak had once laughed at the idea of humanity resisting. Now, they weren't laughing anymore. They were afraid. The Vorak fortress stood like an unshakable mountain in the heart of the ruined city. Thick black walls, reinforced by alien metals, towered over the crumbling remains of human civilization. It was the command center, the brain of their occupation, guarded by thousands of elite warriors. Nothing could penetrate it. Nothing could challenge the Vorak here. Yet, deep inside, Korthos felt something was wrong. His warriors were vanishing at an alarming rate. Patrols sent out never returned. Security cameras recorded nothing but static before entire units disappeared. No bodies were left behind. No signs of a struggle. It was as if the planet itself was swallowing them whole. And now something new had begun. Distress signals, not just from outside the fortress, but within its very walls. Soldiers stationed at key checkpoints were calling for help, only to fall silent before reinforcements arrived. Jorvac burst into the command chamber, his normally composed expression laced with panic. "My lord, another unit has vanished. This time, within the lower barracks. The footage is the same, nothing but static before they disappear." Korthos turned toward the massive screens lining the chamber. Every hallway, every chamber was under constant surveillance. Vorak technology was unmatched in its ability to detect threats, and yet, whatever was taking his warriors remained unseen. Korthos bared his fangs. How is this possible? No life forms detected, no energy disturbances. What are we dealing with? Jorvac hesitated. "I don't know, my lord, but some of the men, they whisper of something unnatural. They believe the humans have returned, but not as they once were." Korthos growled. "Returned. They never left. We have them locked in chains." Jorvac met his gaze, his mandibles twitching. "Then tell me, my lord, why are those very chains empty?" Korthos froze. The prisons, the humans. With a snarl, he activated the feed from the holding cells. Rows of human captives, shackled and weak, had been imprisoned there. Beaten into submission, forced into labor. But the footage on the screen was impossible. The cells were open. The chains lay discarded on the floors, and not a single human remained. "Impossible," Korthos whispered. A deep hum filled the room, low at first, then growing into something unnatural, vibrating through the very walls. The lights flickered. Screens distorted. A static-filled voice whispered through the speakers. "You thought we were broken." Korthos' blood turned cold. "You thought we were weak." Jorvac grabbed his weapon, his eyes scanning the darkened chamber. "What is this? You never understood what we were. The Vorak warriors around them raised their rifles, fear creeping into their hardened expressions. A loud clang rang through the halls, then another, and another. A rhythmic sound, like heavy footsteps, but distorted, echoing in ways that defied logic. The main entrance to the command center slammed shut. Jorvak's communicator crackled to life. "This is Unit 7. We're under attack. We can't see them. We can't." Silence. Korthos grabbed Jorvak by the shoulder, his voice deadly low. "We need to see what we're fighting." Jorvak nodded, activating the fortress's thermal scanners. The screen lit up, flooding with data, showing heat signatures across the entire structure. But something was wrong. Shapes moved through the halls, dozens of them, hundreds. But they weren't Vorak, and they weren't human. They had no form, no solid mass. Their outlines flickered, shifting like smoke. Ghosts. Then, one by one, they began to take shape. Figures in sleek, advanced armor materialized out of nowhere. Black visors concealed their faces. Their movements were impossibly fast, fluid like liquid, but deadly like trained assassins. Weapons hummed with energy, but unlike any Vorak technology. Then the slaughter began. Vorak soldiers fired blindly, their weapons blazing in the dim corridors. But the intruders, these ghosts, moved like shadows, slipping through attacks as if they weren't even bound by physical rules. A warrior swung his blade at one, only for his own weapon to slice through empty air, then reappear in the hands of his enemy. One of the ghostly figures raised a strange rifle. A pulse of blue energy fired, striking a Vorak soldier. He didn't fall. He didn't even have time to scream. He simply disintegrated. Korthos roared in frustration. "What are they?" Jorvak's eyes darted across the screens, watching the massacre unfold. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Humans." Korthos turned sharply. "That's impossible." Jorvak shook his head. "Not the humans we conquered. Not anymore." The Vorak had underestimated them. Humanity had not simply escaped. They had become something else. Through the chaos, a single voice rang through the fortress's speakers. Calm. Steady. "You took our world." Korthos turned, his claws tightening. The voice was not Vorak. It was human. The leader. A warrior. A ghost returned from the dead. "You enslaved our people. You crushed our cities. You thought you won." A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the command chamber. Unlike the other armored ghosts, this one stood tall, his helmet gleaming under the flickering lights. He removed it slowly, revealing a scared face with piercing human eyes. "We were never defeated. We only adapted." Korthos lunged forward, his blade slicing through the air, only to hit nothing. The human warrior had vanished before his strike landed. "You thought we were easy to enslave." The voice whispered right behind Korthos. He spun, but it was too late. A blade sank into his chest. His vision blurred. His knees buckled. As he collapsed, he could see the remaining Vorak warriors falling one by one. The fortress alarms screamed, but no reinforcements came. No rescue. The Vorak Dominion had believed itself invincible. Now, its leaders were vanishing, just as humanity had. The ghosts had returned. The Vorak home fleet hung in the dark void of space, an unstoppable armada that had crushed entire civilizations. Massive warships, bristling with weapons, drifted above the ruined Earth like predators circling a wounded prey. But something had changed. The silence was wrong. The stillness unnatural. Grand Warlord Xalzor stood on the bridge of the Dominion's flagship, staring at the glowing tactical displays. Hundreds of Vorak ships filled the holographic grid, each one a fortress of destruction. They were an empire built on conquest. They had never lost a war. Never. Yet now, a cold unease coiled in his gut. A single Vorak dreadnought had gone dark 2 hours ago. No distress calls. No explosions. It had simply vanished from existence. The ship's locator beacon still pulsed in place, but there was no response from the crew. Then another vessel went silent, and another. Now, nearly a dozen ships had gone dark, their signals still there, floating like lifeless ghosts in the void. No signs of battle, no visible enemy, just silence. Zalzor turned to his second-in-command, High Commander Vector, whose mandibles twitched with barely concealed tension. "Deploy scout drones. I want eyes on those ships." Vector nodded, his clawed fingers dancing over the control panel. Dozens of small surveillance drones shot out from the flagship, weaving through the fleet toward the silent vessels. Their live feeds flickered onto the main display. One by one, the cameras painted a picture of horror. Inside the ships, Vorak bodies lay scattered. Their weapons were still holstered. No signs of forced entry. No external damage. It was as if death had come for them in an instant. Then, movement. Zalzor leaned forward. A figure flickered into view, stepping through the corridors of a lifeless warship. It moved with unnatural grace, its sleek armor blending with the shadows. More figures appeared behind it. Silent, calculated, efficient. The ghosts. Zalzor's throat tightened. He had heard the reports. The impossible disappearances. The Vorak soldiers vanishing without a trace. The rumors of human survivors turning into something more. "Impossible," he growled. "Humans do not have this technology." Vector's voice was hoarse. "Then what are we fighting, my lord?" The answer came before Zalzor could speak. A single whisper through the comms. Calm. Cold. "We warned you." Every Vorak soldier froze. The voice wasn't theirs. It wasn't even coming from the ships. "We told you what was coming." The fleet's lights flickered. The holograms glitched. A low hum pulsed through the ships. Something was inside their systems. "You thought we were weak." Zalzor's blood ran cold. The attack came all at once. A pulse of blue energy exploded through the fleet, knocking out entire sections of the Armada's defenses. The Vorak ships, once impenetrable fortresses, flickered with disrupted power grids. Weapons went offline. Shields flickered. Systems crashed. Then, the ghosts moved in. They came like wraiths, materializing from nothing, their cloaked ships slipping between the Vorak vessels undetected. Sleek, black crafts, far smaller than Vorak warships, darted through the fleet like predators among lumbering prey. They fired in quick, precise bursts. No wasted shots. Every hit disabled a critical system. The Vorak fired back, but it was like fighting shadows. Their weapons passed through empty air as the ghost ships flickered in and out of visibility, their cloaking tech rendering them untouchable. On board the Vorak flagship, Zalzor gritted his teeth. All batteries. Fire at will. The fleet responded with a desperate counterattack. Plasma cannons roared. Energy torpedoes screamed through space. The darkness of the void lit up with the fury of an empire refusing to die. But the ghosts were faster. They danced between the shots, dodging with inhuman precision. One Vorak battleship took a direct hit to its reactor, a controlled detonation that didn't just destroy it, but collapsed it inward, swallowing it into nothingness. More ships fell. More warriors died. The Vorak fleet, mighty and unstoppable, was being carved apart piece by piece. Inside the flagship, Zalzor's hands curled into fists. "We still outnumber them 100 to 1. Vector's eyes flickered with something Zalzor had never seen before. Hopelessness. "My lord, we already lost." Before Zalzor could respond, a figure materialized in the heart of the command chamber. Not through a door. Not through the airlocks. It simply appeared, stepping out of the very shadows. A human. Tall. Clad in black armor. A faint blue shimmer flickered around his form before fully solidifying. His visor glowed with an unnatural light, and in his hands he held something Vorak warlords had never feared before. A blade. Not a gun. Not a plasma rifle. A simple, ancient weapon from a race that should have been extinct. "You should have killed us all," the human said, his voice steady. Zalzor roared and lunged, drawing his own energy sword. He swung with all his strength, aiming to cleave the human in two. The human moved like a phantom. He was there, and then he wasn't. He stepped aside, twisting effortlessly as Stalzor's blade slashed nothing but air. A single strike, a flash of blue steel. Zalzor staggered, clutching his chest. His own blood seeped between his claws. The human leaned in, his voice a whisper. "We are the nightmare you created." Zalzor fell to his knees. Around him, the command center's alarms screamed. The Vorak fleet was collapsing. The mighty Dominion, the conquerors of 100 worlds, was burning. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the human warrior vanishing once more, disappearing like a ghost into the void. And then silence. The war was over. Humanity had won. The Vorak homeworld burned. From orbit, the once mighty heart of their empire lay in ruins. The vast megacities that had stood for centuries, home to billions of Vorak, now crumbled under their own weight. Plumes of smoke and fire stretched toward the sky. The great statues of their warlords, symbols of their unchallenged supremacy, lay shattered on the streets, their broken faces buried in dust and ash. Above the planet, the remnants of the Vorak fleet struggled in desperation. Their mighty warships, once the terrors of the galaxy, now fought against an enemy they could not see, could not track, could not stop. Human vessels, sleek and ghost-like, darted between them, striking with deadly precision before fading back into the void. The Vorak were losing, but they were not yet broken. Deep within the heart of their capital, beneath the last stronghold of their empire, Supreme Warlord Vorkath stood in his war chamber, his claws digging into the metallic surface of the command table. His red eyes burned with fury as he watched the reports coming in. His forces were being slaughtered. His empire was dying. And for the first time in his long, blood-soaked reign, he felt something alien creep into his mind. Fear. A figure stood at his side, his last remaining general, Shorka. His armor was scorched, his mandibles twitched with barely concealed panic. "My lord, the humans are here." Vorkath growled, slamming his fist into the table. "We still have soldiers. We still have weapons. We fight to the last Vorak." Shorka hesitated. "They are inside the stronghold." The word sent a chill through the warlord's spine. Impossible. The Vorak fortress was an impenetrable bastion. Layered defenses, automated turrets, thousands of elite guards. No enemy had ever set foot inside. And yet, the humans were already here. The lights flickered. A low, eerie hum filled the war room. The Vorak warriors reached for their weapons. Then the screams began. From the outer corridors, bursts of gunfire echoed. Shadows moved in the dim glow of the emergency lights. Vorak soldiers fired desperately, but their weapons struck only air. Figures in black armor flickered in and out of view, moving like phantoms, striking with inhuman speed. The Vorak were fighting ghosts. Shorka raised his rifle, his hands shaking. "We must fall back." Vorkath snarled. "There is nowhere to run." The door to the war chamber slid open. The Vorak soldiers aimed their weapons, claws tightening over the triggers. But nothing was there. Silence. Then, one by one, the Vorak guards collapsed. No gunshots, no visible strikes, just bodies hitting the floor. Vorkath's breath turned shallow. His claws twitched. He turned, his instincts screaming. A human stood behind him. Tall, silent, cloaked in armor that shimmered with an unnatural glow. The Vorak warlord lunged, drawing his blade in a final act of defiance, a strike meant to split the human in half. But the blade never landed. The human sidestepped, impossibly fast, a blur of motion. And then pain. Vorkath staggered, looking down. A glowing blue blade had pierced his chest. Not a Vorak weapon, a human weapon. He coughed, black blood spilling from his mouth. His vision blurred as he stared at the human before him. You were supposed to be weak. The human warrior leaned in, his voice cold as death itself. We were never weak. You just never gave us a reason to fight like this. Vorkath's world darkened. The mighty ruler of the Vorak, the conqueror of countless species, fell to his knees. And then he fell no more. The last warlord of the Vorak dominion was dead. The final strike had been delivered, and humanity had risen from the ashes. The Vorak Empire was no more. Their mighty warships had fallen, their cities reduced to ruins, and their warlords lay dead in pools of their own blood. The species that had once enslaved humanity crushed entire civilizations beneath their heel and declared themselves rulers of the galaxy had been erased in a storm of vengeance and shadows. And yet, the silence that followed was deafening. From orbit, Commander Elias Drake stood on the bridge of the Phantom, watching the Vorak homeworld through the reinforced viewport. Fires still burned across the planet's surface, the last embers of a dying empire. The once mighty capital city was now a smoldering graveyard of broken towers and shattered monuments. Drake's fingers curled into a fist. It was over. For years, humanity had suffered under Vorak rule. They had been enslaved, humiliated, exterminated like vermin. The Vorak had believed humans to be weak, fragile creatures that could never resist their dominion. They had been wrong. The Vorak had made one fatal mistake. They had let some of them live. Humanity had adapted. They had hidden in the ruins of their own world, learning, waiting. They had stolen Vorak technology, studied it, improved it. They had become ghosts, warriors who moved unseen, striking with deadly precision. The Vorak had expected a broken people. Instead, they had created an army of nightmares. Now, the galaxy belonged to the survivors. Drake turned as a soft chime echoed through the command deck. The main screen flickered to life, revealing General Avery Carter, the leader of the resistance, her face lined with exhaustion and quiet triumph. "It's done," she said. Drake nodded. "It's done." A long silence stretched between them. For so long their lives had been war. They had fought, lost, and sacrificed everything to reach this moment. And now that it had come, what next? The Vorak species, Carter asked. Drake hesitated, glancing at the planet below. The surviving Vorak, those who had not perished in battle, were scattering like rats. Their empire had fallen, and with it, their will to fight. Some had flowed into the wastelands of their ruined world. Others had thrown down their weapons, their eyes hollow with defeat. "They're finished," Drake said. "They'll never rise again." Carter's gaze hardened. "Ensure it. No mercy." Drake understood. The Vorak had shown none when they had slaughtered Earth. They had burned entire cities, torn families apart, erased human history with fire and steel. No one had been spared. This was justice. Drake turned to his crew. "Deploy ground teams. Secure the last strongholds. Wipe out any resistance." A chorus of affirmations echoed through the bridge. The final act of the war had begun. But even as the last remnants of the Vorak were being swept away, another thought lingered in the air. What now? For centuries, the Vorak had ruled this sector of space. Dozens of species had been enslaved beneath their rule. Now, the empire was gone. The chains had been broken, and humanity stood at the top. Drake turned back to Carter. "We were always the underdogs. We fought because we had to. But what happens when we're the strongest power in the galaxy?" Carter was silent for a long time. Then, finally, she spoke. "We rebuild. We create something better." Drake exhaled slowly. It would not be easy. The galaxy was scared, and power vacuums never remained empty for long. There would be battles ahead, against those who sought to take the Vorak's place, against those who feared humanity's rise. But this time, humanity would not fight for survival. They would fight for something greater. A future. A home. a legacy that no empire, no enemy would ever erase again. Drake turned back to the viewport, watching as the last of the Vorak warships fell in flames. The age of humanity had begun, and this time, no one would take it from them.